Okay. Anin Bojo, we're going to get started. Anin Bojo, Minande, Beneshi Kwe Indigenous, Gitaganzi B Donjaba, Gigo and Dodem, Anishinaabe Kwe and Dao, Port Moody Megwa and Dinda. So hello everyone. Welcome today to our panel titled Catalyzing Change, Unveiling Phase 2 of ICA's Decolonizing Climate Policy Project. This is, yes, let's please clap. That's exciting for us. We will let you know, I'll first introduce the panelists and give you a little bit of an idea of what this project has entailed, and then I'll also show you how you can access it a little bit closer to the end so that you're not reading it while the panelists are speaking. So we're so excited today to present the findings of our new report, Decolonizing Climate Policy, Part 2 of the second phase of the project. Yes, you heard it right. That means there will be another part being released next year in 2024. Today we have a great group of folks here to speak to their work on a variety of topics. So who is Indigenous Climate Action? If you don't know who we are an Indigenous-led organization guided by a diverse group of Indigenous knowledge keepers, water protectors, and land defenders from communities across so-called Canada. We believe that Indigenous people's rights and knowledge systems are critical to developing solutions to the climate crisis and achieving climate justice. Today, we have Eriel Deranger, Executive Director of Indigenous Climate Action. We have Brittany, yeah, you can clap, pretty great. We have Brittany Superno, who's Métis Cree and a youth knowledge holder of the North American region. We have Callie Davies-Flett, who works with the Athabascan Chippewan First Nation as the regulatory advisor. Was that not right? Okay, you were laughing. I'm like, and Carole Monture, who is our climate leadership coordinator here at Indigenous Climate Action. Over the last few years, hence why we were so excited about the release of this report, we have been working on these two projects, these two phases of this report. In the first phase, we did a bunch of research with folks from across the country, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis folks, about climate change and climate policy. We've also been reading Indigenous scholars' reports on the subject, and our staff has been thinking hard and long about the real Indigenous climate-led policy and climate solutions happening here and on the ground back home. The project included two phases, and in the first phase we focused, so yes, you can actually take a look on our website and read the very first one, which was released, I believe, in 2021, maybe 2022, where we took a look at the critical analysis of the Pan-Canadian framework and the healthy economies, healthy environment policies that were implemented in so-called Canada to investigate whether they take aim at the root causes of climate change and both respect and meaningfully include Indigenous peoples, our rights, knowledge, and approaches to climate action. We know that settler-led climate policies are failing. We've argued that abundantly in our 2021 DCP report. The Risks and Threats of Nature-Based Solutions Climate Report we also released in 2021 also provides some background into that. These policies... Oh, there's translation. I'm so sorry. I am so bad for that. Okay, we're going to slow it down. These policies that we have analyzed in these reports are failing to serve our community's needs, and they're failing to address the root causes of the crisis. They're even failing to reduce carbon pollution in any real way. Oh, everyone's English speakers here. Okay, well, I can talk fast then. I like to jam-pack lots of information when I speak. I just get so excited, I can't help it. So we're looking elsewhere for the real solutions, for transformative approaches to policy making from the ground up, for centering our own ways relating to the lands, waters, and territories of which we come from. We're looking to each other as climate leaders, and these conversations that we have gather such a wealth of beautiful ideas, reflections, insights that are rooted in traditional ecological intelligence, and we want to share it all. Of course, it's much too beautiful to share for just one report, which is why we're going to be sharing it in a series of releases. So, on to the panelists. We wanted to ensure that this panel, of course, introduced what the project is and what the report covers, but also how are these solutions being enacted and what can we learn from those from our four leaders here today. So we're going to start with you, Eriel, and feel free to introduce yourself in your native language if you prefer before you answer my question. So here we are. at the Conference of the Parties of the UNFCCC. All these world leaders here are talking about developing climate policies for their home states. What lessons do you think they can learn from the DCP report, Decolonizing Climate Policy, and how can they begin to decolonize and deconstruct their climate policies?
Just a light question. It's really light. I think first understanding and really trying to help break down what decolonization is in relation to policy is really, really important. I think a lot of these spaces, when we talk about state colonial leaders, they've been called out for the abuses and the harms they've enacted on Indigenous populations the world over. What this has amounted to is this sort of pushback of these colonial systems and stating, A, they weren't created with us. They weren't created or designed to actually uphold our rights. And in many cases, colonial systems, governance, structures, and policies were actually created to subjugate, oppress, and commit genocide against our peoples. So a lot of what we're seeing instead of decolonization is indigenization. And I need to state that there's nothing wrong with indigenization, but it is not decolonization. We cannot conflate the two pieces together. Indigenization is what we're already seeing. We're seeing Indigenous rights, Indigenous peoples peppered throughout the negotiations. We're seeing Indigenous peoples being elected into colonial political parties. We're seeing Indigenous MPs. All of this is good. I'm not trying to say this is not a good thing, but that is not decolonization. And so when we talk about decolonial policies and why this is so important for these spaces is that even as Indigenous peoples, the second largest civil society group that attends the UNFCCC negotiations every single year, second to oil and gas lobbyists that this year are 7-1, as in for every Indigenous person, there are 7 oil and gas lobbyists here. We are not given power at the table. We do not have the ability to enact our sovereignty and self-determination. We cannot speak for ourselves. We still have to essentially ask for permission from colonial governments and systems to have our needs and our rights recognized within a colonial system and structure. So decolonial policy becomes really important because instead of continuing to participate in colonial structures, we're actively advocating for the creation of something different that's decolonial, that centers Indigenous rights, knowledge, lifeways, value systems at its core. And when we talk about Indigenous values and lifeways, one of the fundamental differences between colonial structures is the fact that colonial structures are, nature is separate. You know, man's dominion over the earth. Whereas Indigenous values and lifeways are interconnected and weaved together. We see this within the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that really tries to embody the fact that our rights are intertwined with our ecosystems, our landscapes, our waterways. JC's like, Eriel, speed it up. But within these structures, we are talking about a decolonial framework that looks towards creating equity, not just for our people as Indigenous peoples, but restoring those relationships with the lands where we come from. I didn't introduce myself properly, but like my name is Eriel Tchekwie. So iklanete danesotlaneta Eriel Tchekwie hushe Deranger betsini hesli. And I'm saying this because it's important because my name Eriel Tchekwie means Thunder Woman. And I said danesotlaneta, which means my Dene name is Eriel Tchekwie, which means Thunder Woman. And it's important to understand that part of decolonization is reclaiming our names, reclaiming our landscapes, reclaiming our value systems, and holding them at the core, not trying to make them fit within a colonial structure. Decolonization requires the deconstruction of these colonial systems and reconstructing them with a different value set and framework that embodies our culture and our values and our interconnectedness. I am Dene, or Dene Slotlane. I come from the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, which is located in the Treaty 8 territories of Northern Alberta in so-called Canada. And we are an Arctic community where we are seeing some of the most intense impacts of the climate crisis. We rely on a winter road that is becoming shorter and shorter in its capacities. We are seeing our lands being imposed and appropriated for oil and gas exploitation, uranium to the east of us, mega hydro to the west, and minerals to the north. And we have to understand that when we talk about decolonial policies and why they become so important is if we had different regulations and policies for the management of our lands and territories, these types of mega industrial resource extractive projects would never exist. We would be looking at building systems for energy, systems for food, systems for resources from our community that come from that values perspective of living with land, living with nature, living in harmony with our relations. The word Dene, when you break down its roots and you take apart the word, like Dene means to flow from the earth. It means to flow from the earth, to come from the land. And what's really funny is the word for a white man is dot-ene. And I was talking with Alice Rigney, who's a language keeper, and she's like, I guess that kind of, when you break it down, it means like no land. It means no land. It means someone who has no land. And I was like, that seems really fitting. She's like, yeah, I never really thought about that before. And we had a good laugh about it. And I really, really want us to think about the fact that decolonization and decolonial policy becomes so important for our people. And I want to read a quote from this report before I pass it on, because I just love it. And it's like right at the beginning, so you'll all get to read it if you read the report. It says, policy is so intimate for us. We've had a very abusive relationship with policy. Since we've had this lived experience of the abuses we face through the Indian Act and different ways of colonization, that means we're actually hardcore policy experts that deserve to be in those spaces to actually make them better and less colonial. There are already experts everywhere within the territories that know what needs to be done. Meaning our communities don't need to have colonial experts to come and tell us how to manage the land. Danica Littlechild, who is one of the founders of ICA, one of the first people that helped create the organization, she said, we don't have to constantly translate ourselves through the eyes of everyday white society. We are our own experts. And decolonial policy development requires us to really harness those knowledges and not try to make them valuable within the eyes of the colonizer, but to take our knowledge and say, this is the way forward. These are the things how we're going to govern our lands. These are how the ways that we're going to govern our waters and our people. And this is so important for us when we see the weak colonial policies that are coming out of these negotiations and how long it's taken them to even get to the development of weak, watered-down policies that are still being driven by dirty extractive oil and gas corporations that see the land as nothing more than something to be ravaged and to make profits off of. And our people don't see it that way. Our people see it as the caribou and the bison and the fish and the waterfowl and all of the migratory birds and the trees and the medicines and the plants are our relatives. We don't see them as something to make money off of. We see them as something we are in deep relationship with. We see them as part of Denende, which is the land of our people. And this is so important because they are a part of that. And I'm going to end with one I know I said I was going to end like twice already now. I'm going to end on one last note. Is one of the big distinctions that I want to also really, really highlight here is that there is some questions that often come up around why do we have unique Indigenous rights? Why? What's the point? 1948 is when the UN Declaration of Human Rights was created. We're celebrating the 75th anniversary. It's really important. But it looks at our unique individual rights and freedoms, which we all deserve and must have. But the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, only passed 16 years ago in 2007, looks at our collective rights. It looks at our collective rights, not as humans only, but our collective rights and relationships with the lands in which we exist and have lived on since time immemorial. This allows us to not just advocate for our rights as communities, but for the rights and livelihood and survival of the ecosystems and where we come from. And this becomes a critical mechanism for advancing strong policy that's actually going to get us to keep global temperatures below 1.5 and reach climate stabilization that the planet so desperately needs. Thank you. Masicho.
So she said it was a tough question, but I feel like that was a really great answer, very informative. I feel like you hit a couple really good points, like asking for permission from colonial government systems for our rights to be recognized. But there's folks on the ground that are enacting these solutions and enacting their rights in real time, and we don't need permission to do so. We have known that for thousands of generations, that we have unique and inherent rights. And one of the things that we focus on in the climate leadership that our next panelist runs is nature is not separate. Indigenous knowledge holds the solutions to climate change and offers a way forward for future generations. So for Carole, back home you run the climate leadership program that highlights Indigenous knowledge, real and false solutions. How do you see real solutions being implemented on the ground in so-called Canada?
Thanks, JC, and thanks, Eriel. I gotta talk loud? Okay, I can do that. Sego Sego Grego, Carole Monture, Yungets, Ganiangahaga, Wagatione, Ashwiganidwagenu. My name is Carole Monture. I am Mohawk Wolf Clan from Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, and I'm the Climate Leadership Coordinator here at ICA. So I definitely want to nerd out a little about the program that I facilitate and coordinate. I've been with the team now for 2 years now, and I've actually been lucky enough in the course of that to work with close to 150 Indigenous people from every single province and territory within so-called Canada, and quite a few down south of the Medicine Line as well. And I learned so much from this program every time we run it. Just the diversity of experiences of people, the level of knowledge that they have, and even though there's so much variation in how the actual effects of climate change are happening by region, there's still just like this shared experience. And I think the participants learn so much, but I feel like I'm also co-learning along with them. And it's really, really solidified my understanding of climate change as we face it, Indigenous rights, and again, the path forward. Because I think that's what I want to focus on the most in the program is the path forward. And I think that's what differs in this program as compared to a lot of like mainstream discussions on climate science. I feel like in the broader movement, it's obviously very white, it's very wealthy, and it's very detached from the majority of people's experiences and their day-to-day lives. For people, to hear about this, even just these figures of like 1.5 degrees Celsius and parts per millions and this idea of this future existential threat is extremely detached from people's realities of just trying to get back day to day. And I think that our program really makes those connections for people, especially for Indigenous people who I feel like are constantly downplaying our knowledge and our understanding, especially for women, especially for young people. There's this tendency to oh, well, I don't know. And I think that's like my major goal within the program is to always uplift people to say no, we want to hear what you have to say, and what you have to say is so valuable. And within this program, when you meet people who come from different understandings and different levels of experience and knowledge about the climate crisis. There's people who are starting from square one, and then we're able to build them up. And there's people who come into the training with years of experience behind them, and to see people who are already on the ground implementing renewable energy projects in their community that again are guided by their knowledge, where to place these projects. We get a lot of concerns on people who come from communities that have really specific ecoregions, populations of birds that are extirpated except for in that area. And we say, all of these solutions are not going to work for everyone, but you have to guide that knowledge. And so not everything is going to work for everyone, and we never take a prescriptive approach. And I'm never coming in as an authority to say, this is what you need to do, and this is how you do it. We want to give people the knowledge, plant that seed, and then they're able to go on and transform that. And even just ensuring that everybody who takes our program has the same baseline level of understanding to ensure that competency that they can then go on and move forward. And so now we're getting people who've taken the program, 2 years ago, who are saying this planted a huge seed for me, and there's so much interest in my community, and I've been able to take this because we share all of our resources as well within the program. We have our climate curriculum, which has like how to put together an agenda, how to facilitate, how to set up. We share all of our climate science. We share all of our Jamboards. We want to make this knowledge as accessible as possible, because everybody has a right to this. And we get people who said, like, I've used your slides and I've been able to do a presentation, or I'm able to do a training, or we're able to partner with people who've taken the training online who now want to partner and do a training in person. And just seeing that level of understanding and the depth of projects that come out of it. It's not just, oh, you know, I took your program, I put up a solar farm. We have people saying, like, I took your program and, you know, I wanted to translate that into my language, or I understand the connections between environmental harms and the harms of our community and lateral violence, and making those connections and healing the land, healing ourselves. Because especially for Indigenous people, we're already dealing with the brunts of colonialism every day in our communities. And climate change is just an added stressor on that. When we're already dealing with lack of access to our lands, to our traditional foods, our ways of life, that climate change is an added stressor. And again, like, just the sheer amount of knowledge that we've had out of that, we're now going into an evaluation process, because we want to look at where we came from and where we're going, and we want to be really responsive to people's needs and what people want to see, because we also get just this like understanding of like more. Like, I think that's our biggest feedback that we get, is we want more. And we are a small team. For a long time it was just JC and myself, education and training. Like, we trained over 100 people one time in like 10 months. And we now have my colleague Willow, who's like brought in some really great capacity. And I'm so excited for what that means for our team and the things that we can achieve now. And just, again, like, I think more is like, we see, again, like, as at Indigenous Climate Action, as part of the global Indigenous Peoples movement, our slogan is colonialism caused climate change, Indigenous rights are the solution. And to me, like, I know what this means so much, but I always want to make sure that people, it's so normal to me, but I always want to make sure that people really, really know what that means, in that Indigenous people have these blueprints, these guidelines for this balanced existence. And we know we've weathered periods of climate change in the past. We have a massive amounts of knowledge of past experiences, as well as knowledge about what's to come. And we're blatantly aware of the system that has failed us and continues to fail us, and really shows no sign of stopping in this space that we're in. And we're over the complete lack of delay and the solutions that are being pushed forward that aren't in line with our values of even just this language of like, we want to scale down unabated fossil fuel, whatever that means, or we're going to rely on carbon capture and storage. Even coming from so-called Canada, there was all of this rigmarole on this emissions cap that they were going to announce, and it's the regulatory framework for the oil and gas cap, which is actually going to reduce emissions by 1/3, and it's going to rely on carbon capture storage. Just again, like this really meek policy and this really meek understanding that isn't in line with our values. And I think that's it, because I will literally go on forever. But I do want to pass it on to my panelists.
My God.
I just want to add one thing. Trudeau literally said at New York Climate Week in September that Canada's climate policy is economic policy. So you can see where their values lie.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think that's why programs like the Climate Leadership Program are vital, because they build that capacity, and it really is unique in the sense that it allows folks to see Indigenous knowledge as the center for solutions. A lot of the time, some of the other programs that I've taken in Western education, Indigenous knowledge tends to be an add-on, and one of the things that Carole, Willow, and myself really try to hit home in that program is that it has the solutions if we were to just look to those and enact those. And you know, like Eriel said, we don't need the colonial governments to recognize our rights to be able to implement these solutions in our territories. So I strongly believe that. Thank you, Carole. Really just a great job. Also, we did train over 150 people in the last 2 years in that program, so I would just like another real hand applause for Carole. Self-determined solutions, uplifting and empowering folks is really just vital to ICA. But to move on to Cali now, Eriel kind of spoke to how your community, because they're both from the same nation, has been impacted by extractive projects, oil and gas in general. As a young person from a heavily impacted community, you have a very unique perspective and experience that we think is vital at these kinds of spaces. Despite that, I do know that your territory still has beauty, knowledge, and solutions to offer. How can we use the lessons from the solutions being implemented on the ground to inform climate policy's development?
Yes, thank you. So to reintroduce myself, I'm Callie Davies-Flatt. Can you hear me? Yeah, you're good? So I grew up in Fort McMurray and also in Fort Chipewyan. I like to say that kind of a little bit of both. So Fort Chipewyan is the community that's downstream directly from the big oil companies that are plaguing our nation and plaguing our communities. So I grew up in that area and that space, and then I always said that I wasn't going to be doing any oil and gas work, that I wasn't going to be working on site, that I wasn't going to go. I eventually got caught up in the system and I ended up going there, and I was working undercover. So So through my little espionage, I was working as a supply chain coordinator. So what that was doing was I was buying the pieces for all the big shovels, the giant shovels, all the giant trucks, the graders, any extractive piece of equipment, I was buying the parts for. And these companies were spending about $1.2 million a day on these components. A day. And I had the authority to spend this monopoly money and buy these things. So eventually I just turned into this shell of a person working 12-hour days at my computer, and finally an opportunity came up to work for my First Nation and work in the regulatory space. And I didn't even know what I was walking into, but it was a temporary trainee position, and I said, I'm taking it. People around me like, well, you're crazy. What are you doing? You're leaving this industry. You're like, everybody works at, everybody, I was almost going to say it again. Works with the bad guy. Everybody does in this community. And I said, no, I gotta take this leap. So I did. I took the leap and I started in this space. And then to kind of connect what we're talking about today, we really have to just explain how it is and what the current system looks like and how we are currently almost trapped in this colonized space, right? And so my job, and I'll just explain it a little bit, is to interact with companies on a daily basis. So anytime that they are coming to extract, explore, or come onto our land or a traditional area, they have to come and consult with us. They're legally bound to, in so-called Canada, to come and consult with us. Some companies understand what real consultation means and actually taking our point of view and actually taking our mitigations. Some need to be schooled. And some of my favorite things to do, and it's a little bit like flippant, facetious almost, is kind of walk in and have them underestimate us and then totally, completely flip the script and then show that we're capable, we have capacity, we're able to do this. And not all First Nations can do that. And the reason that ACFN has that capacity, it's not a good thing, actually. It's not a good thing because we have so many industries imposing on us. I would rather focus elsewhere than have interactions with companies every single day, but we do. And it's because we have so much resources within our land. So to walk through this colonized space, it's my job is we've signed agreements. We were the last holdout within the region. There's a few things, but we've signed agreements, and we now are under these agreements. And my job is to say, okay, well, it says here in Article A2.1 that we can, gain funding for capacity funding for this, or you need to consult with us before you do anything that's super extractive. And we have to go through these processes, sending emails back and forth, going through meetings and working through that colonized space. And it's so frustrating. It's absolutely so frustrating. Especially since when I was coming in, I was like, yeah, I'm going to fight. We're going to keep going. But it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and then forget that like, oh, wait, I'm representing a nation. Like, I'm not just slogging away at my computer. Like, I'm doing something bigger. And so our office is, like I said, not really so much a good thing, but we're so lucky to have expanded in the last couple years. and even doubled in the last 16 months, I would say, doubled in size with employees in our office. And we have people protecting our rights and lands. We have our own monitoring programs. We have, a dedicated space for government relations to work with, our colonizers to be able to talk to them and speak their language. And since I was a spy, I speak industry's language. So I'm pretty happy with that. But just working on the ground, I feel like ACFN is on the front lines. And regardless of how we chose to work through what has been imposed on us and how we're walking through that space, I really do believe that we're able to, in connections like this, being able to listen to panels and be on panels like this and bring something to the international space, I'm really excited for the future because things really, especially our message, I think that it is kind of being heard at a larger scale. We just went, like the delegation that I came with today, we just went on this almost like a retreat, almost like while we were here at COP. And we were all sitting around in a circle, and some of the questions were like, what are the mindfulness, climate, like how to be mindful and solve climate change, basically. It was a really broad question, and everything kind of like, everything could be said in that question, like whatever. But as we went around in the circle, and this is with people from Peru, mostly Russians, believe it or not. Don't ask me how I got there. And it was like just all going around in a circle and talking about this. And eventually the circle got to an indigenous way of knowing and an indigenous way of being in order to solve this problem without even hearing any of these talks. So I'm very thankful to be able to express like how it is working through that. And I think that there is a future in decolonizing our systems. And I'm happy that I'm at the table. I'm happy that we're able to spread the message, but there is a long way to go. The power structure is 7-to-1. That's how it is. For every person reading an agreement, there are 10 industry people reading the same agreement and interpreting it their own way. And also coming in with their 7 lawyers versus our 1, right? And we're working within that space. It shouldn't be the way it is. I don't want to do it, but I'm doing it, and we're fighting, and that's how ACFN's working through it. So that's it.
Thank you to our spy. I love that. I just love that. I think it's really important to learn the structures that are causing harm around us, and I think that's really helpful, the information that you were mentioning, especially with regards to your nation, that not all nations, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities in so-called Canada can have these types of structures and this form of meaningful engagement with different kinds of companies. And I really agree with that, like being trapped in a colonial space. And I feel like when you mentioned that $1.2 million a day being spent by these companies on big shovels, I was just like, couldn't help but imagine, like, could you all imagine with me, like, what if we invested that each day into Indigenous-led solutions? That would be the future that we're looking for, and that's why we're here. So today, we're also very, very lucky to have with us today Brittany Superno, who is a knowledge holder for the North American region for the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform. You've been here at COP, you've been sharing your experiences and your knowledge on many different topics at the LCIP platforms. How do you hope to see the knowledge you've shared with the LCIP inform the negotiations?
Tansei, Brittany Supernal Nitsukasin, Kiwetanak East Prairie Métis Settlement, Kayate Oceania, Maga, Musqueam-Skaigan, Mikwak-Nuigan. Hi, my name is Brittany Supernald. I am originally from East Prairie Métis Settlement in northern Alberta in so-called Canada. I am currently, though, living in Edmonton, a Musqueam-Skaigan. And as JC mentioned, I am the North American Youth Delegate Knowledge Holder under LCIP. And my first week here was dedicated to sitting in on roundtables and meetings where we're bringing forth our traditional ecological knowledge in hopes of it applying to a larger global scale and kind of fostering that sustainable future that we all hope to see. It was quite interesting bringing myself for the first time here at COP. into such a colonial space, and having to share my trauma of my community burning this past May in the Canadian wildfires, and having to relive that trauma of my father, of my kuka, my grandmother who's 99 years old, and my community just over and over again, in a way to be used in a report that will be written by a non-Indigenous person. You know, there was a lot of frustration there. There was a lot of disillusionment, and kind of having myself question, like, what am I doing here? Like, why am I here? And I spoke with other knowledge holders, because we represent the seven different parts of the world, because as you know, there's only 7 different nations in the 7 different parts of the world. So yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, we were kind of feeling this this frustration that, you know, like, as much as we're sharing and that we're coming here to share tens of thousands of years of knowledge within 1 to 2 minutes, you know, of our opening statements, and then 6 minutes of just being able to speak. But of course, you know, very censored of what we're able to say, you know, and everything. And then for that to go be recorded by non-Indigenous people, and then eventually written into a report by a non-Indigenous writer, like non-Indigenous writers, to be reviewed by a council of non-Indigenous people, you know, before it's released. You know, just understanding that so much of the comprehension of what we're saying, the nuances and the intricacies of the knowledge that we're sharing is being lost so quickly in just that one process. And that's even before it's brought to the larger UNFCCC tables, where, you know, it will inform policy, you know. And so there was just a lot of like frustration there for me personally. And, you know, I needed to take a couple days off to kind of process that. Because it is extractive, it's violent in a way that, you know, they're requesting that we share our knowledge. And even using the title a knowledge holder, which in a lot of our communities holds such a sacred meaning that is so far removed from what's happening here. And you know, there was just a lot of processing that needed to happen. And it took me kind of some time, like a day or two, to kind of process that and to come to the conclusion that even in this space, however violent it is, our presence is still needed, because unless we are here and we are loud and we show up the way that, you know, our ancestors have deemed us to show up, then we are going to be continued to be exploited in these policies. We're going to be continued to be forgotten in these policies, even though like we're still eons away, like from where we should be. It is a step forward, because I know a decade ago this wasn't happening. You know, ALSIP and this knowledge holder space is relatively new. It's part of a 3-year plan, and we're in the 2nd year of that, or second? Don't quote me on that, but we might be in the 2nd year of that. But it's kind of like the work being done and the bridge is being built now. And it's kind of, when we come to these spaces, it's understanding of that, that the true work doesn't really happen in these big colonial spaces. They happen back in our communities with our own initiatives, with the own work that we're doing, you know, like the climate leadership. And for myself, like I'm doing a tree planting initiative for my community to kind of help Mother Earth and the Beaver Clan return, and for reforestation efforts and everything. Just like understanding that a big part of like decolonizing is ensuring that we're not fitting ourselves into this tight little box, and knowing that this isn't the space where a lot of work happens. Because as it was mentioned before, it took so long for them to even outline a very watered down policy. You know, it takes forever. It's to just undergo the bureaucratic processes that are needed because we're on a global stage. But to recognize that this isn't where all the change is made. This isn't even where the big change is made. The big change happens in our communities and the work that we do, and in a way that is right. When we meet in a right space, in a right way, with ceremony at the center, with stories at the center, in our traditional ways. And, you know, I think it's really important that we start investing into those initiatives, whether they're youth-led or not. They You know, like there's so much energy that we put into the UN, into COP, into these colonial spaces. Well, decolonization and decolonizing climate policy means that we put the exact same energy, if not more, into what's happening at home. And yeah, that was like a big learning curve that I had coming here, because this is my first COP. And I think that, you know, a lot of good work does happen here in us showing up and presenting ourselves and doing our actions and speaking out against, you know, the 1 to 7 of that we are against like the lobbyists and whatever. But again, just like remembering that like a lot of our work happens when we go home and when we do our traditions, when we go back to our communities, when we go back to our families. So yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you to our knowledge holder. I think you made quite a few really great points about how you have concerns on how that knowledge could be potentially used or reduced down. And that's something that our Indigenous folks face a lot of the times when interacting with certain kinds of colonial structures, educational institutions. We need to ensure that data sovereignty and ensuring that Indigenous knowledge is not watered down to data points, that is instead introduced as a whole entire system that can't be, pieces cannot be taken away from that. Otherwise you lose the integrity of that knowledge, which comes from our lands and territories. So I think that's a really good point and super vital. So I did have other questions, but I got a text while I was up here. Please let me ask a question. So I would like it to open it up for the next 15 minutes. If folks have any questions for any of our panelists, I am open to them now. Can you guess who it was?
Sorry, I just, so I work with Carole, very luckily, with the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation. And my question is to this amazing panel. In Canada, like we know, there are a lot of unique Indigenous communities that all have different needs and are at different places in this journey of decolonization. For some that are more trapped or that are more stuck, even themselves in this process, what experience do you have, or what advice might you have in helping that along? And even internally, like how do we pass that message internally up as well?
Climate leadership program. No, but I actually do think that part of it is that colonization has done a really good job of making us a part of our own oppression. I think that there's a really good, one of my favorite books of all time is a book called, and I plug it way too many times, it's called Columbus and Other Cannibals. And it's written by a Native American author named Jack Forbes, who passed away in 2012. And he wrote this book in 1976. And so what I find so interesting is that it still is so relevant in 2023. And what he does is he equates colonialism to a disease of the mind and the soul that he relates to the deity or the spirit called the Witigo, which was a cannibal. And he says, when you think about colonization, it's literally trying to consume the land and consume the people and consume the power that that land has. And it's a disease. And I'll get to my point in a second, because one of the lines in his book, he says, one of the dangers of the Witigo disease, or the epistemology of the Witigo disease, is that no one is immune. And that those that often try to fight the Witigo succumb to the Witigo themselves. And this is important when we talk about moving towards communities that feel stuck or don't know what to do, or they feel stuck. It's because colonization has taught us that our culture, our values, our knowledge has no place in society. My uncle just passed away 2 days ago. And he was a knowledge holder. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day. I'm not able to make it home for the funeral. But I was having a conversation because he was a houseless person. He lived on the streets and he chose to. And he chose to because this is a common thing that happens to people that are from the bush, that are from the land. My uncle and my dad are residential school survivors, and some of them ran away and they went and lived in the bush with my grandpa, with my Baba Isidore. And when they had to be forced into cities and live in these urban places, they didn't have a place. They were told that their knowledge systems had no place. Who they were was devalued to the point that they felt that they deserved nothing in this society. And he died in a homeless shelter. This is the life of our people when we believe that this is who we are in society. So my uncle Roger was a knowledge holder that fought for Dene sovereignty, to be who we are as Dene people. And it starts with those people demanding that who we are as people, as Dene, as Denende people, people of the land, that our rights, our knowledge systems are upheld. And it starts with our young people. It starts with undoing and decolonizing our minds, decolonizing the systems that we live within. And it starts by telling people that you are enough, just as you are. Your knowledge is important. Your language is important. Who you are as Indigenous people is important in society, and not because it is a value to colonial systems, but because it's a value to you. It is a value to the life on this planet. And so it's really important to understand that these systems are not just about fighting climate change. It's about fighting for human rights and dignity. It's about fighting for justice for this planet. It's about fighting for justice for all. And it starts sometimes with the tiniest spark. The tiniest ember can ignite so much, like Carole said. Sometimes these climate trainings spark people to bring back their language, to bring back their cultural practices. I remember my cousin Mike Mercurdy, who just got elected as council just a few weeks ago. When he started this, he said, no one gives a shit about us. No one gives a shit about us. And he helped to create the Fort Chipewyan Renewable Energy Society. He went on to, he's working on his master's in sustainable energy or sustainable community development. Our communities are starting to see themselves not as a burden to colonial systems, but as the answer to our removal from the clutches of colonial systems and structures. And we have to constantly remind every community that you are valuable, not because you have a PhD or an academic accolade of some sort, but because you come from community and intergenerational knowledge that has been passed down from generation to generation. We are our own experts. We're the best ecologists, best hydrologists, best conservationists, best scientists, because science, after all, is about observation and conclusions made from those observations over time. We have the longest standing scientists in our community that have been studying our lands and territories for thousands of years. We need to continue to enforce that with every single community that we work with.
It's always really tough to lose a knowledge holder in your community and in your territory, especially one that you know and love. But we do know that they live on through the legacy of their stories, through the legacy of the ones that they loved, and through their knowledge and the things that they brought into this world. Did anyone else want to offer a reflection on that question? Or
Yeah, it's kind of hard to go after. But I think that's something that I think about a lot, again, particularly as a Haudenosaunee person. We have an extensive history of colonization. And one of I would say my mentor, Susan Hill, put out a book. It was based off her dissertation. It's called The Clay We Are Made Of, and it's outlining Haudenosaunee land tenure on the Grand River. And one of the things that she outlines throughout this book, just this history of continual land theft and encroachment and destruction, and just like year by year, and how heavy that is. But even in that example, time and time again, our people still had agency in that and made choices where we could. And I think that that's important sometimes when we look at our history. And when you exist in a colonial system, especially as an Indigenous person, in Canada, we were wards of the Crown until not that long ago. We were not, that's part of why they stole our children in residential schools, was we were not qualified parents. And I think that that's like a key part of like what Eriel said, is we've internalized so much of that. And I think it's sometimes easy to look down on our ancestors or devalue them or say they didn't work hard enough or fight hard enough. But within that, they were making the really tough choices, and they were thinking about us. And again, I have to be aggressively Haudenosaunee at all times, but we have a wampum belt gathering, and they have the wampum out. And one of the things that they said was, when our ancestors made these agreements, they were thinking about us right now. And I think when I sometimes feel a lot of despair, I think back to them, and I think back to the choices that they had to make, and that they were thinking about us now. And I think in this moment that we're in, I think a lot about who's to come, our faces to come, and I'm thinking about them, and just like understanding that continuity, and that you're not alone, and that, you know, there were people thinking about you, and you're looking forward to the future, and just that there's so much strength in that. Even in times of like when you're like literally made to be like an economic hostage in your own territory, of just like falling back on that strength of our ancestors and knowing that they were thinking about us and how much they love us.
Did anyone else want to respond to that? Yeah.
Hello. Sorry, this one's a bit weird for me. Yeah, just like to tack on top of both of those amazing points. A lot of the elders I know and listen to kind of speak of this time that we're in as like a golden age, you know, like we are literally only one generation out from residential schools. My dad was in residential schools, my cookum was in residential schools and everything. So it's quite literally the first generation out from this like massive like genocide like that was active and ongoing for hundreds of years. And they call this the golden age because it's a lot of our young people and then even our older people who are returning finally, you know, to that home, to that place of, you know, of honoring and our knowledge holders and honoring the knowledge that we have, not in how it exists in a colonial system, but how it stands alone and how our own knowledge systems stand alone. And I think it's like really too important because I know in terms of like next steps for like a decolonization movement, I think as we're looking, you know, like to decolonize like something as large as a climate change space, I think it really starts with like our, sorry, there's a lot of noises. I'm trying to regulate as best as I can, so please be patient with me. Through our gaining our independence again from these colonial systems like capitalism, like government systems, like a lot of these things that we have grown a dependence on very recently. A large conversation that my cookum loves to have with me is how my generation will be the ones where we start going back physically to our roots. You know, we will have, in the last like 20 years or so, we've had a mass exodus from our communities because of those cycles of poverty and addiction that we're trying to escape. Well, now's the time to return so we can build healthier communities, ones that are are built on foundations of traditional knowledge that we hold and that we honor. And so, it's really exciting to see that so many people hold our knowledge in just such a high esteem outside of this space, you know? So I think that's something really exciting to look forward to and something that is being reflected too by this report. So, yeah.
We got the oh my God, is this working? Yeah, we got the 5-minute warning, but I just wanted to state that sometimes people are just like, what does decolonial climate policy look like? And I worked also for my First Nation. I did not work in the regulatory department. I worked with the chief and council, but one of the really cool things that I saw, and I just want to share this because I always give this as an example of how to use Indigenous knowledge to actively change policy. Between 2010 and 2012, the government was creating something called the Surface Water Quantity Framework. And they got their best scientists and they're like, oh, this is going to be the thing that's the flow rate that's going to save the ecology in the region. This is what they call it, the ecological base flow. And they presented it to our community, and Lisa, my cousin Lisa, who runs our Lands and Resources department, she was just like, well, I don't know what this means. And they got some scientists, and she's like, I don't know what any of that means. And she's like, Well, let's ask the land users. So she got these scientists to go out with the land users and show them like actually tangibly what this meant as far as like flow rates and all the pinch points in the river. And they were like, see, it'll be good for you. And one of the land users goes, so what happens when I put a bull moose in the boat? Am I still gonna be able to travel? And they were like, oh, we didn't think about that. And then they put the equivalent of a weight of a bull moose in the boat, and guess what? They couldn't travel. And so this is how you can see, and what did that result in? They resulted in the flow rate, an Aboriginal extreme base flow rate being implemented in the region that was almost twice as high as the ecological flow rate. So Indigenous knowledge from a very simple, what appears to be very simple, but actually involves our interconnectedness and relationships with the land, can have tremendous impacts that bolster existing science and can push what we consider as acceptable to the next level, and not just safeguard it for the next 10 years, but safeguard it for the 7 generations to come after us. This is the power of decolonial frameworks that can guide policy and take us beyond the limitations of colonial structures that we have tried to convince ourselves we're locked within, but we're not. We just need to imagine a possibility outside of colonial structures that really draws on knowledge systems that we have devalued for so long.
Well, I'm really glad I let you ask that question, because we had some really great responses. And your comment, Brittany, it's really interesting. Brittany's from a community that's thousands and thousands of kilometers away from my home territory, but the Anishinaabe also have this 7-fire prophecy. And in that 7th fire, it's when the young people take back their songs and their languages and their knowledge, and they begin enacting those things again. So my question to the crowd is, what are we leaving for future generations, and what kind of ancestor are you going to be? So just to quickly close up, because I know we got 2 minutes, the report released, and of course all these folks, and just at ICA in general, we need everyone to be taking climate action seriously to address the negative impacts of climate change, and even more importantly, address the colonial systems and structures that are causing it. You can access this report on our website at www.indigenousclimateaction.com/publications. You can scan the QR code there, or you can grab one of the beautiful bookmarks designed by our comms manager, Rosie Boucher. And in the next and final report in this series, part 3, we will share the powerful stories and visions of what else is possible, how climate policies can be founded in ceremony, in natural law, and in our nation's unique governance systems. We will center the voices of the youth who are leading this fight and chartering new ground. We will lay out a wealth of beautiful climate solutions already being enacted across the country, both in rural and urban communities, as First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples are reclaiming our own systems and forging new and old ways of living in balance with land and with each other. Again, colonialism caused climate change. Indigenous rights, Indigenous knowledge, and Indigenous peoples are the solution. Thank you.